The COVID pandemic forced many of us to work from home and our kids to join virtual classrooms. Sadly, many home networks crumbled under that increased load, as most network hardware does not share the available bandwidth fairly between devices, suffers from bufferbloat which causes massive ping spikes, and falls flat on its face when it comes to content filtering or blocking malicious websites. So in today's video I will show you how to set up an entire home network from start to finish, which takes care of all these issues. And I will also show you how to control what kind of websites your kids have access to. That said, you must still teach them how to use the internet properly, tell them about the dangers of the internet, and be interested in what they do online. What I will show you only adds an additional layer of security when it comes to what kind of content your kids have access to. Now, I could have split this video up into several parts and so made more money, but I decided against that because I think it's better to have everything in one video. Also on YouTube, the chapter feature makes it very easy to access a specific part of the tutorial, so a long video is not an issue. Now, first of all, this is not a budget build. I chose products where I'm not only confident that they get the job done, but also provide an interface that is easy to use. So no scripts and no command line, because I want that as many people as possible can follow this guide. Also, today's video was not sponsored by Untangle, Minisforum, Ubiquiti or anyone else. It was made possible by the support of my awesome and patient patrons. Now, which hardware and software did I choose for this setup? In the past I've done videos where I showed how an edge router and its smart queue feature helps to keep your ping stable in online multiplayer games. But what I want to achieve today is not possible with an edge router. So we will use the UM250 from Minisforum to build our own router. It comes with a Ryzen 5 Pro 2500U, which I paired with 8GB of DDR4 RAM and a 120GB SATA SSD. That is plenty of horsepower for Untangle, which is the software that will turn this PC into a router. Yes, there are free alternatives like pfSense. However, later in the video you will see why I chose Untangle instead, which I've been using for almost 2 years now at home, and I don't want to miss it anymore, especially because I didn't have a single issue during the lockdowns, despite having 2 bandwidth-hungry teenage kids at home. Then, for good Wi-Fi you need a good access point. Depending on how big your apartment or house is, you might even need multiple access points for good coverage. I highly recommend connecting each of them with an Ethernet cable to your network switch, and avoid range extenders and mesh solutions at all costs, especially if you have to use your Wi-Fi for time-sensitive services like online gaming. So I chose Unifi access points from Ubiquiti. I've been using their switches, access points and cameras for many years, and they have served me very well. Also, I find the management tools to be extremely easy to use, which is a big factor for today's video. Now, to find out how many access points and which access point you need, you can use Ubiquiti's Designer service. Here you can upload a floor plan of your apartment or house and then start adding access points. With the 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz overlays, you can see how good or bad the signal will be, and if you need additional access points for good coverage. I went for the U6 Lite, which is a 2x2 MIMO Wi-Fi 6 access point, and a U6 Long Range, which is a 4x4 MIMO Wi-Fi 6 access point. For the switch I chose the Switch Lite 8 PoE, which will connect all my devices and provide power for both access points, as well as the Unifi CloudKey, which manages the Unifi devices. You could also install the Unifi controller on a Windows or Linux machine if you like, and so avoid the costs of the CloudKey. But that would increase the complexity of the setup, so I decided to use a CloudKey instead. If the Switch Lite 8 PoE is too small, then there's also a 16-port version. And yes, you can connect a PC, TV or console to one of the PoE ports. The switch detects if the device needs PoE power and then only provides power when required, so you cannot damage a PC by connecting it to one of the PoE ports of the switch. Okay, so that is the hardware and software we will use. Now let's install Untangle. So as I said, this is not a budget build. While Untangle itself is free, the apps that we need are not. For home users there are 2 different packages. Home Protect Basic provides the apps we need and costs $50 per year. Home Protect Plus costs $150 per year, which I find way too expensive. The only reason why you might be interested in that package is because it includes WireGuard for remote access to your home. But since the basic package comes with OpenVPN support, I rather use that than spending another $100 per year to get WireGuard and a few more apps I don't need. That said, if you have more than 50 devices in your home network, then you must go for the Home Protect Plus package. If you are not sure which package to buy, then you can use the 14-day trial, which allows you to test all apps. But for the initial setup, I will not even use the trial. We go to wiki.untangle.com, click on FW downloads, and under old versions download the ISO of the most recent version. Next, connect an USB drive to your PC and run Rufus. In boot selection, click Select and choose the downloaded ISO file. Verify that the file system option is set to FAT32 and the partition scheme is set to MBR. Then click Start to write the image to the drive. Do not connect the USB drive to the Untangle PC just yet. Start the Untangle PC and go straight to the BIOS settings where you enable Power On after AC loss, so that the PC will boot automatically after a power loss. Now connect the USB drive and exit the BIOS. Then choose the graphic installer, follow the instructions, and finally reboot when it's done. Next, you are greeted by Google Chrome. Launch the wizard, select Home as install type, set a secure admin password, and add your email address. Next, use an Ethernet cable to connect the box from your internet service provider to your Untangle PC. As you can see, the internal interface went up, which means that I chose the wrong port, as this one is for our local network. So unplug the cable and plug it into the other port of the Untangle PC. Now the external interface went up. Next, do yourself a favor and label that port with WAN or Internet and the other one with LAN. Now we must configure the internet connection. What you must enter here depends on your connection and your internet service provider. The settings that I use will most likely not work for you. So talk to your internet service provider to find out how you can use your own router. Before you proceed, make sure to test the connection to verify that your Untangle router has access to the internet. Then move on to the configuration of the internal network, also known as your LAN. Here you can change the internal address of the router and so your LAN network. I will just use the default setting. Should the setup wizard detect a wireless network interface, then you will get the wireless settings page. And even though we will not use that interface, we must still complete the wireless setup. In the next step, I keep automatic updates enabled, but disable the command center connection because I don't need to manage this Untangle installation remotely through that service. Next, Untangle wants us to log in with our account so that we can install the apps. But we will skip that for now and finish the basic setup first. So we go to Config, Network, edit the interface 3, which is the wireless interface, disable it because we do not want our Untangle router to use Wi-Fi, and then click Save in the lower right corner. Next, we edit the internal interface and select DHCP configuration. In here you can adjust the DHCP range if you like. Per default, Untangle will present itself to the clients as DNS server. There's nothing wrong with that, however I like to have the DHCP server tell the clients to use specific DNS servers, like Google's 8.8.8.8 and Cloudflare's 1.1.1.1. But you don't have to do this if you don't want to. If you want to change the DNS servers that Untangle itself uses, then you can do that by editing the external interface and entering them here. Next, let us do a speed test to find out how much bandwidth we have and how bad the buffer bloat on our connection is. So since we have just the Untangle PC connected to the internet, this test will be very accurate as no other device uses the internet. During the download test, we see the latency increase by more than 130 milliseconds. So if someone consumes the entire download bandwidth while I am gaming, then my ping can increase by up to 130 milliseconds, which is quite bad. However, it gets worse. When someone consumes my entire upload bandwidth while I'm gaming, then my ping can increase by more than 400 milliseconds. So let's fix that. We go to Config, Network, Advanced, click on QoS and enable QoS. In here we enter our download and upload bandwidth in kilobits per second. For the download I entered 80,000 kilobits per second instead of the measured 84,000, because I know that I will not always get 84 megabits per second. For QoS to work, you must enter bandwidth values that your connection is able to provide at any time of the day. So if you know that you have less bandwidth in the evening, then you must enter that value here, or QoS will not work when your actual bandwidth is less than what you entered. Also, do not forget to click Save in the lower right corner, and then run the speed test again where you should not see any buffer bloat now. Lastly, you might want to enable UPnP. Yes, this is a potential security risk, as you basically allow any application in your network to use UPnP to punch a hole through your firewall. But if you play games which depend on UPnP, or where you see a strict net status in some games, then you might want to, or have to, enable that feature anyway. And that concludes the basic setup of Untangle. Next, let's set up the Wi-Fi network. Connect the LAN port on the Untangle PC to one of the ports on the Unifi switch, then connect your PC to one of the other ports, and finally connect the CloudKey to one of the PoE ports of the switch. Once the CloudKey powered up, we see its IP address on its screen. Now the next step is entirely optional and you can skip it, especially since I said that no SSH is required for this tutorial. What I like to do is upgrade the CloudKey to the latest firmware before I continue with the setup. So in PuTTY we enter the IP that is visible on the display of the CloudKey, click on Open and accept the security alert. Then we use ubnt for both the username and the password, which only works when the CloudKey is fresh out of the box or has been reset to factory defaults. Next we go to ui.com, click on Support, Community, Releases, deselect all tags, select Unifi Routing and Switching, and select the latest Unifi OS CloudKeys Gen 2 entry. In here we select and copy the SSH command required to upgrade the firmware, go back to PuTTY and click on the right mouse button which will paste the command into the window. Then we go back to the website, click on Download Links, right-click on UCKG2, select Copy Link Address, go back to PuTTY, right-click to paste the link, press Enter to upgrade the firmware, and then we wait for the CloudKey to reboot. Now we open a web browser and enter the IP address visible on the display of the CloudKey. Select Setup UCKG2, agree to the terms of service, click on Next, select a setup type, and click on Next. To complete the setup, we must sign in with an ui.com account or create one. At the time of recording this tutorial, there is no way to do an offline setup. However, you can disable cloud access and the ui.com user later if you like, to then manage the site with an offline user only. Next, we can set how frequently we want our Unifi devices to check for software updates, and we can also disable it if we like to. In the next step, I want to disable the Auto Optimize feature, because I do the configuration on my own and I do not want my settings to get changed or optimized without me knowing. Once the setup is complete, we go to System Settings, and under General I like to set a fixed IP address for the CloudKey. To do that, we change the IP configuration from DHCP to static. Keep the gateway, which is our Untangle router, set to 192.168.2.1 and set the IP address of the CloudKey to 192.168.2.2, which is outside the DHCP range we set in Untangle earlier. Then confirm the change and enter the new static IP address of 192.168.2.2 in the web browser. Log in again, go to System Settings, select Updates, and if you like, you can enable automatic updates so that the installed apps, like Network, get updated automatically. Should there be an update, then you should install it right away before we proceed with the setup. While the Network app is updating, we connect one of the access points to our PoE switch. Once the update is done, go to Advanced and enable SSH access if you like, which can be helpful in some cases for troubleshooting, but make sure that you set a strong password. In here you can also disable remote access, which I mentioned before. However, if you do that, then you will lose the cloud backup feature. Now let's do the Wi-Fi setup. Click on the blue icon in the top left and then select the network app. Go to Settings, search for Dark, select Dark Theme and enable it. Now in here you can also disable the new user interface, which I'm not a big fan of. However, I will use the new interface as the old one will disappear eventually, so it makes no sense to use the old one, even though I like it a lot more. You can also change the time format and language here if you need to, and do not forget to click on Apply Changes when you are done. Next, select Unifi Devices, select the USW Lite 8PoE switch, and click on the Adopt button to add that device to our Unifi network. Once that is done, do the same for the U6 Lite access point. Next, select Device, give that access point a meaningful name, and do not forget to click on Apply Changes. Then install the firmware update for the switch, and once that is done, update the firmware of the access point. While the update is running, we connect the other access point, select Adopt, click on Device, give it a meaningful name, and click on Apply Changes. Finally, also update the firmware of the second access point. While that is running, select the switch, click on the first port which sends you to the Ports tab, click on port 1 again where we can now enter the name of the device that is connected to that port. Then we repeat this for the other ports as well so that we always know which device is connected to each of the ports. And since you are a real professional, you also label the ports on the switch, as well as the access points themselves, which can be very helpful when you have more than one access point of the same model. Once all devices have been updated, we head back to the settings, select Add New Wi-Fi Network, enter a name for our Wi-Fi network, as well as a strong password, and then we click on Add Wi-Fi Network. Now the Unifi controller updates the configuration on both access points to broadcast the new Wi-Fi network. Next, you want to set your access points to use the best 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz channels. I could do an entire video on that topic, so this will be a quick crash course. Go to the place in your apartment where you want to deploy the access point or where you have it placed already. Then on your smartphone, open the Wi-Fi Man app or any other app that shows you the surrounding Wi-Fi networks. Here we can see that the 2.4 GHz channels 1, 6 and 11 have networks on them. These channels do not overlap, which is why you will see most networks use one of these 2.4 GHz channels. That is, if the admin knows what he is doing. So you want to stick with these channels for your access points and select the one which has the least networks on it. The 5 GHz band is a bit more complicated. Here we see that channels 38 and 46 are in use, which do not overlap. Back in the Unifi controller, select an access point, click on RF, and select the 2.4 GHz channel from the drop-down menu. For the 5 GHz band, you will notice that there is no channel 38 nor a channel 46. The channels in the drop-down menu have a channel width of 20 MHz, but per default we have a channel width of 40 MHz selected for our Wi-Fi network. So to have our Wi-Fi use a 40 MHz channel, we have to combine two 20 MHz channels. This graphic here explains it very well. Channels 36 and 40 have a channel width of 20 MHz. Per default, the channel width of 40 MHz is selected in Unifi. So when you select channel 36, then this causes channel 36 and channel 40 to be combined. And that means that you use two 20 MHz channels to create a single 40 MHz channel. And that 40 MHz channel is known as channel 38. So to set your Wi-Fi to channel 38, you select channel 36 in the 5 GHz drop-down menu. I know this is a bit much, but I hope you can use this information as a starting point to find the best 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz channels for your home. Then I also like to disable meshing because I do not need that and want to avoid it at all costs. Finally, click on Apply Changes. Then select a second access point, choose a 2.4 GHz channel, 5 GHz channel, disable meshing, and apply changes. And that's it for the Wi-Fi setup. Now let's head back to Untangle and install some apps to improve our network further. In Untangle, log in with your Untangle account or create a new one. Then go to Apps, Install Apps, and install WebFilter, Bandwidth Control, Application Control, and Reports. Next, click on Go Back to Apps, select Bandwidth Control, run the Bandwidth Control Setup Wizard, click on Next, and here we find the bandwidth values already set to what we entered in the QoS section earlier. Then we click on Next, select Home from the drop-down menu, click Next, Next again, and Close. Then we go to Rules, click on Add, enter Deprioritize Steam Downloads as description, click on Add Condition, select Application Control Application, enter Steam in capital letters as value for that condition, set the priority to low, click on Done, drag and drop that rule on the top of the list, and click Save. So what we just did is create a rule which will prevent Steam from eating up all our download bandwidth when other users or applications would also like to have some. The reason why this is required for Steam but not for the Epic Launcher or Origin is that the Steam client creates so many download sessions that even with QoS enabled it can still cause minor buffer bloat. With that rule in place, Steam is able to max out our download bandwidth. But as soon as another client also needs some bandwidth, Untangle makes sure that Steam won't cause an issue for other clients or applications. With the low priority, we tell Untangle that Steam is allowed to use up to 100% of our available bandwidth, but we only reserve 6%. Now, how do I know that Steam is the correct value for the Application Control application field? That is extremely easy to find out. First, we start a download in Steam. Then click on Sessions in Untangle, and there we have Steam. When we then look at the session details, we can see that the low priority has been applied by bandwidth control, so our rule is working. So if you want to do traffic shaping for additional services, you determine the name of the service or application with the Sessions feature, and then create a rule in the bandwidth control app for that service. Just know that the new rule does not affect existing sessions. So for the rule to get active, you have to terminate the existing session first. Now let's make our network more secure. Click on WebFilter and then Categories. Per default, the WebFilter app blocks the following categories. The list of web servers behind these categories gets updated automatically. That is part of the subscription package. So when we try to access a site for adults, then we get this message from Untangle. Now the reason why I like Untangle for content filtering is that the WebFilter is session-based, not DNS-based. This means that you cannot circumvent Untangle's WebFilter by changing the DNS server on a client. You also cannot gain access to a blocked site by using a web browser which does DNS over HTTPS. To get around the WebFilter, you would have to use a VPN client. But when your kids are old enough to know how to use a VPN, then it's time for an entirely different kind of talk. Or you just block VPNs from your network. Also, the WebFilter allows you to block specific sites, to pass a specific site that is otherwise blocked by a selected category, you can pass entire clients, and you can get really creative with the rules, where you can, in example, pass or block an individual site or category for specific clients, or all clients associated with a specific user. Now let's say that we only want to block sites that are a security concern, so we deselect the other two categories and click on Save. And that's it. Now you have a home network where buffer bloat is not an issue, and many malicious websites are blocked automatically, which makes your network more secure. Now, if you have small kids, then you must teach them how to use the internet and tell them about the possible dangers. You must also have an interest in what your kids do and watch online. But if you would like to use Untangle's WebFilter as an additional measure to limit what kind of content your kids have access to or can stumble upon, then there are quite a few different ways to achieve this. I could create additional rules in the WebFilter app to block more categories just for the devices my kids use. But it is quite a lot of work to create these rules and then remember to update them when one of the kids gets a new device. Also, these additional rules won't affect the devices of their friends when they connect to our Wi-Fi. So what I like to do is create a separate network and Wi-Fi for the kids, and then have a separate instance of the WebFilter limit what content the devices on that kid's network have access to. Sounds complex, but it's actually quite easy. First we go to Config, then Network, and click on Add Tagged VLAN Interface. For the interface name we enter VLAN 10 kids, the parent interface is the internal interface, VLAN tag is 10, and for the IP address we enter 192.168.10 as that is the VLAN tag, and then .1. And for the net mask we select /24. So now we created a separate network called a VLAN. The VLAN tag is 10, and Untangle sits in that separate network with the address 192.168.10.1. Now the devices which connect to that network need to get an IP address. So we come over to the DHCP configuration tab, enable DHCP serving, enter 192.168.10.100 for range start, and 192.168.10.200 for range end. Set the least duration to 3600, and you can also enter a DNS override as we did before if you like to, but that is not required. Next, click on Done, and do not forget to click on Save. Now we've created a separate network for the kids. Next, let us create the Wi-Fi. Head back to the CloudKey, select Network, go to Settings, select Networks, add New Networks, and for the name enter VLAN 10 kids. Click on Advanced, set the VLAN ID to 10, disable Autoscale Network, set the DHCP mode to None as we do not have a Unifi router, change the gateway IP to 192.168.10.1/24 as that is the address of our Untangle router in the kids network, and click on Add Network. Next we go to Wi-Fi, select Add New Wi-Fi Network, give it a name, set a strong password, and select the VLAN 10 kids network from the drop-down menu. This will cause that every device that connects to the kids Wi-Fi is placed on the kids network. Finally, click on Add Wi-Fi Network. Now the CloudKey sends the new configuration to the access points, and a few seconds later the kids Wi-Fi is online. Let's say the kids also have their own PC, which is connected to port 4 of the switch. So we have to tell the switch that any device connected to that port goes onto VLAN 10, the kids network. To do that, we click on the port, give that port a meaningful name, change the port profile from All to VLAN 10 kids, and click on Apply Changes. So no matter if you connect a PC, a console or a TV to that port, it only has access to the kids network because that is what we selected here in Unifi. So then connect the PC and label the port. Then we switch over to the kids PC. Go to the network settings, select Change Adapter Options, right mouse click on the network interface, then Status, and click on Details. Here we see that the kids PC is on VLAN 10 with Untangle as gateway and DNS server. If we had entered a DNS override, then these DNS servers would show up here. So everything is looking good here. Now let's head back to Untangle, go to Apps, and install the Policy Manager. Click on Go Back to Apps, select Policy Manager, click on Policies, select the default policy, and here we see the WebFilter, Bandwidth Control and Application Control apps that run under the default policy. Now we are going to add a new policy for the kids. So we click on Add Policy, select the default policy as parent, enter kids for the name, and click on Add. Now we install a new instance of the WebFilter for the kids profile and click on Save in the lower right corner. Then we go to the Rules tab, add a new rule. For the description we use is kid, add a condition, select source address, enter 192.168.10.2-192.168.10.254, change the target policy to kids, click on Done, and save. So with that rule, we tell the policy manager that it must apply the kids policy to all clients with an address between 192.168.10.2 and 192.168.10.254. We do not want the kids policy to be applied to Untangle itself, which is why the rule starts with 192.168.10.2. Now click on Back to Apps, and from the Policy drop-down select the kids policy. Now select the WebFilter, which is the instance we installed for the kids policy. Any change that we do here only applies to the clients on the kids network. So we can set more categories to block, we can manually add sites that we want to block, etc. Whatever we do here will only affect the devices on the kids network. Just don't forget to click on the way too small save button in the lower right corner when you are done. If you want to do changes to the WebFilter for the main network, then just switch to the default policy. Now let's go back to the kids PC and try to access a website that is blocked. As you can see, that works as it should. Again, the WebFilter is session-based, so unlike most other content filtering solutions, changing the DNS server on the client does not circumvent the WebFilter, nor does using a web browser which does DNS over HTTPS. Finally, grab a smartphone and connect to the kids' Wi-Fi. In the network details, make sure that you are on the correct network, and then try to open a website your kids are not allowed to access. As you can see, everything is working as it should. Now, with this setup, the clients on the kids network still have access to the devices on the main network. So if you have a NAS on your main network that the kids have a folder on, then you can map a network drive on their PC, or connect to a network printer that is on the main network. If you want, then you can completely isolate the networks by creating a firewall rule, but that is outside of the scope of today's video. The only downside of using Untangle in this setup is that mDNS is not supported, which means that your kids cannot access your Sonos speakers, nor can they stream a YouTube video to your TV on the main network. Having said that, that might not even be a downside. Nevertheless, mDNS is one of the most requested features, so if you want to see it added soon, then please head over to the website I link to in the description and let the developers know. So now that we are done with the setup, head over to the Untangle web interface, click on Config, System, Backup, and then Backup to File. Then switch over to the CloudKey, Settings, System Settings, Maintenance, Backup and Restore, select Settings Only from the drop-down menu, and click on Download Backup. So should anything happen to the CloudKey or the Untangle PC, you now have backups of the configuration to quickly restore your home network. And that's it for today. Shout out to my awesome and patient patrons who keep my channel alive with their support. If you would like to join them, then you can find a link to my Patreon in the description down below. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, subscribe for more, ring the bell to get notified when I upload my next video, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris, and this was Battle Nonsense.